Before we begin, I want to let you know that this episode contains descriptions of physical and sexual violence. Please take care while listening.
In the late 80s, I was on the streets in Vancouver, and I was off a street off Robson Street, and I was at the bottom of that stairwell, and I was looking up, and I saw a figure that looked robed to me as I was looking at the top of the stairwell, and of course it was Norval.
This is Gabe Vadas.
And as our eyes met, he motioned with his hand for me to come closer. And I thought at first it was a monk or, some special spiritual person because of the way the light was hitting. And as I approached closer and closer, coming up the stairwell, I noticed that it was actually a blanket he was wearing.
Like Gabe, Norval was living on the streets of Vancouver.
Then he told me that he was a famous artist. But I couldn't see it because he was in a blanket. And he was kind of disheveled because, as we all know, alcohol struggled with him. During the course of that same day, we went and picked up some art supplies. He went up to a park and he sat down and started to draw these wonderful images. And he was so sure of himself. And even though I knew he was not in the best place because he had told me that he was living down under a bridge under Gastown, his imagery, just the drawing, just the sketching he was doing at the time was profound. But it still didn't sink in that he was a famous artist. That didn't sink in until I started living with him 2 months later.
Norval gets a place to live, and he adopts Gabe, takes him in as his son.
And so he became my father figure very early on.
Gabe started helping Norval, doing some work for him.
So he would send me to these galleries. Basically, I was just going to drop off the art and take whatever money they were offering.
And over time, Gabe starts to sort of manage Norval.
It was like pulling teeth from a tiger. You could not manage Norval Morrisseau. Norval Morrisseau managed you. And that's what it was.
And managing Norval was about to get a lot trickier. On a visit to a gallery, Gabe notices something odd.
A person had a photograph of a work that they had. And they showed it to Norval. And he didn't seem that interested. The person walked away and he leaned over to me and he says, "I didn't paint that picture."
If Norval didn't paint that picture, who did? From CBC in Canada and ABC in Australia, this is Forged. Episode 3, Norval Fights Back. Thunder Bay is often in the news, not for good reasons. Corruption, racism. It has some of the highest homicide and hate crime rates in the country. Some locals call it Murder Bay. My producer and I have landed here in January, in the middle of winter. The lake is partially frozen, the sidewalks are icy. But it's beautiful here. Steep rocky cliffs, red maples, jack pines, yellow birch. And then there's the lake, Lake Superior, or Gitchigumi, Ojibwe for Great Sea. Growing up, we used to drive through here almost every summer on the way to visit my grandmother. But today, I'm here to talk to a painter.
Hello. Hi.
A guy named Tim Tate.
Good. You're Tim?
I'm Tim.
Hi, Tim. I'm Adrian. Right on. So we've caught you right in the middle of painting.
Yeah. As soon as I get up, I have my coffee and I just get started.
Hello.
And I don't look like it.
He opened the door with a wet paintbrush in his hand, and he hasn't stopped painting since I got here. He's smoking. It's kind of hazy, and it takes my eyes a minute to adjust to the amazing chaos in his home. His paintings cover the walls. The paint is still wet on some of them. And there are painting supplies on every surface, next to his bed, on the tables, and shelves.
So you're like a compulsive painter.
Yeah, like I cleaned up everything you guys coming over, eh? Like everything was everywhere here.
Tim started painting when he was 9 years old at his home on Sachiko Lake First Nation, a fly-in community in northern Ontario. He moved to Thunder Bay about 30 years ago, and today he paints in the woodland style, like Norval.
Bold black lines, colors. Sometimes it's spiritual, sometimes it's just a painting. I paint the way I feel or the way I see things. I paint just because I want to. No reason.
What would you say are the differences between Norval's work and yours?
Mine's better.
It's the similarities to Norval's work that got Tim tied up in this.
I was trying to sell my paintings, like door to door. And I went to this one place, it was a law office, and I looked at the bulletin board, and I see my painting there, and then it says Norval Morrisseau on there.
So Tim was standing in a law office, looking at this bulletin board, and he sees a flyer with a photo of one of his paintings in it. But instead of his signature on that painting, it was signed by Norval Morrisseau. Tim had sold that painting to a guy named Gary Lamont. So how did it end up there, with Norval's signature on it? Tim had an arrangement with Gary. He'd sell him paintings in exchange for drugs, or money, or both.
And I was a drug addict. He took advantage of that for sure. But I've been clean for a good 20 years now. And
Did he ever tell you how to paint?
I mean, yeah, he told me, don't be so detailed. You say if I was to do a face, the eyes, don't put anything in there like extra colors. Telling me not to overdo it, eh? It's so simple.
Tim found the requests odd, but he hoped it would be a steady cash flow. He made over 40 paintings for Gary, and after seeing his painting with Norval's name on it, Tim was pissed.
I went after him. I wanted my paintings back. But he told me he had burnt them at his camp. And then one time I got really drunk and I wanted to go terrorize him.
How did that go?
I'm still here. I could have got killed.
The more I learned, the more it became clear that my painting came from a fraud ring in Thunder Bay. And that especially became clear when I met Tim Tate.
Kevin Hearn's search for the truth of his painting led him and his lawyer to Tim in Thunder Bay.
He was able to point out specific works that he had created that now had Norval's signature on them and that had been sold through Gary Lamont. His testimony was very important in proving that without a doubt, there is a big fraud going on here.
Tim knew all the paintings he had made for Gary, and none of those paintings were Kevin's. Tim hadn't painted that one. So who had?
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm well, thanks.
Good.
I'm at the Paint-A-Turtle art shop in Thunder Bay.
There's a lot squished in here, as I'm sure you'll realize as we go. This is the canvas section here, canvas stretchers. A lot of people will buy their own and stretch them.
As an artist, shops like this one are kind of my happy place. I love talking to people like Lorraine Call. She's the co-owner here.
I can show you some of the colors.
Oh yeah, all the sort of bright colors like the reds and the cadmium oranges, the cadmium reds.
Name any artist in the area. They probably shop here. Remote First Nations communities that are long drives and flights away, Lorraine ships to them. Gary Lamont shopped here too.
He used to come to the store quite often and buy a lot of paint, a lot of canvas. He would send people to pick things up and pay for it with a credit card on the phone. That happened a lot.
So what was Gary like?
Gary was creepy. I didn't like serving Gary, but he was a customer. Our customers are our customers. You are polite to them and you serve them and you do the best you can to make them happy. He was always in gold. He had gold chains and he has gold rings and stuff. I don't know. Some people just give you a feeling that you just don't want to be close. You don't want to. He always was like that for me. One time right at the end of the year, he came in with these 4 young men with him. They had white hoodies, and they were like this team who we had come in, and they pretty much cleaned us out of all the canvas. It was like $1,100 worth of canvases. I actually asked him, "What are you doing with all this canvas?" And he said that he was buying gifts, Christmas gifts, for the Aboriginal artists in the communities up north. It was after Christmas. It was the end of the year, so Christmas was already over.
Kevin and his lawyer, Jonathan, were trying to piece things together. They knew that there was an art fraud ring operating out of Thunder Bay, and they knew that Gary was involved, but they needed to prove it. They thought they could do that by tracing Gary's supplies. So Jonathan sent a letter to Lorraine at the Painted Turtle.
He first sent a letter asking if we had a receipt for one specific name. Sent me a list of other names and asked me to go through.
Jonathan asked Lorraine to look into Gary's purchases to see if they could prove that he was producing fake Morrisseau paintings.
She provided us with countless receipts of sales of canvas, of paint, of brushes.
I would come in early to do that, looking for the receipts, and I did stay late sometimes too.
Lorraine provided us with a lot of receipts that were materials sold to Gary Lamont or people around him. And we wanted these for a number of reasons. One of them was just to prove that there were large quantities of materials being sold to Lamont, to give credence to the idea that there could be a fraud. But also, we wanted to be able to look at the quantity of canvas that was being sold so we could start to estimate just how big the output was.
So Gary was buying lots of supplies from Lorraine, and all that paint and canvas was going somewhere. They were going to Gary's house. And there were other rumors about what was happening at Gary's, about other crimes he was committing. And Kevin was about to get a call from someone inside the house.
An important part of the journey for me was to build trust with people.
Kevin Hearn again.
And actually go and meet them and sort of let them know I was trying to do this for the right reasons. It wasn't about the money for me, it was about the principle of it.
A lot of the people we were speaking to are Indigenous people who have a very justified distrust of people like me. I'm not Indigenous, who may come asking questions.
Jonathan Summer, Kevin's lawyer.
And so it took a very long time to build up that trust and then to demonstrate that what we were trying to do is just to tell the truth.
And then we got a call from Dallas Thompson, and he asked if he could meet me. He was part of the fraud ring. And that's the first time I went, this is real. This is absolutely real. I'm on the right track. And Dallas and I met, and he told me his story, and we were both in tears by the end. And I said, we're going to get through this.
So Dallas Thompson is a guy who grew up in Thunder Bay. He's Indigenous, and he, at a fairly young age, I guess in his late teens, got involved with Gary Lamont. Gary Lamont would supply him with drugs and money, and in exchange, Dallas would help out.
Dallas confirmed some of the rumors that Kevin and his lawyer Jonathan had been hearing. Gary was making fake Morrisseau paintings, was running an assembly line, producing the forgeries in Thunder Bay, and Dallas was inside the fraud ring.
And helped manage the art fraud ring. He helped store the paintings. He went on trips to deliver the paintings. He communicated with potential buyers across the country. Dallas informed me how it operated, how they would cross the country on a road trip and deliver paintings or sell them through auction houses.
There was a reason Dallas told all of this to Kevin. We spoke with Dallas, and he ultimately decided not to partake in this series. But he testified in court about what happened to him. In his testimony, Dallas said that when he was a teenager, Gary gave him alcohol and drugs. And things took a very dark turn.
He said this in his court testimony, so I don't feel I'm, breaking any privacy. He was raped by Gary many, many times, and he was trapped in a very awful situation.
This abuse went on for years. There are some very painful details in Dallas's testimony. As a sexual assault survivor myself, I don't feel the need to relay them all to you now. One thing we know is that Dallas feared for his life, not only because of what was happening to him, but because of rumors, which Gary won't discuss with us, about what he had done to another young man, Scott Dove.
Scott Dove was a teenager and in the 80s. He was murdered in a very brutal way. And the investigation led to Gary Lamont. Lamont became one of the key suspects in the case. But ultimately the case just fell apart and Lamont was never charged and nobody else was. And so it remains to this day an unsolved murder in the Thunder Bay area.
Finally, Dallas left Gary for good, and he decided to speak to Kevin and to testify in court about Gary's fraud ring and about what Gary did to him.
And Dallas said, Kevin, I will help you with your art fraud case if you help me bring justice to Gary for the sexual assaults.
And it represented a kind of a big shift for me, and I know for Kevin as well, in the way that we looked at this problem, because up until that point, this was a case that was about fraud. And from that point on, the fraud took second place because it became a case about very deep injustice. And we wanted to solve that problem as much, if not more, than the fraud problem.
As Kevin prepared to go to trial against the gallerist who sold him his painting, Joe McLeod, it became clear that Kevin was not the first person to have an issue with Joe.
It seemed to happen more often. You know, somebody would show a photo or somebody would be talking about this piece of art, and then it just wasn't his work.
At first, when Norval saw the fakes, he didn't seem to care much.
He really, at the time, didn't pay attention.
But that changed in the early 2000s, when Norval and his adopted son Gay Vadas got online and started to see the scale of the forgeries.
So when we would scroll on the internet, we would see all of these, let's just say, these works available. And he knew he didn't paint them. Yeah, he lit up like a candle then. He was that pissed him off. That was it. And when he saw that and saw how vast this was and how many works were being penned in his name, well, he got irate. This was like, okay, what the fuck are we going to do about this?
Norval's general approach to the fakes was to have sworn declarations drawn up in which they would list a whole bunch of paintings as fakes and forgeries or fakes and frauds.
Norval, with the help of Gabe, would look at gallery collections online and list all the paintings he said were fake.
He, in some cases, reached out to these galleries and he made an attempt to get them to sort of sit down with him and go through their inventory so that he could tell them what was real and what wasn't. And they refused.
One of those galleries was Joe McLeod's. That's right, the same gallerist who Kevin bought his painting from.
So Joseph McLeod had been in a kind of war with Norval for a long time. Ever since at least the early 90s, there had been exchanges of correspondence between Norval's lawyers and Joseph McLeod. And Norval had been accusing Joe McLeod of copyright infringement and of selling large numbers of fake paintings. And then it escalated into the early 2000s with these sworn declarations and accusations and demand letters going to McLeod's gallery to that he was selling fakes and that he was obliged to take them down or stop selling them. But, he never complied with any of that.
At that time, Norval was struggling with his health. He had Parkinson's disease. He'd also suffered a stroke. He was in a wheelchair. He couldn't walk. He couldn't paint anymore, and he had difficulty speaking in a way that people could easily understand.
I'd seen that Norval Morrisseau himself had taken great pains, even when he was physically in a very difficult place, to have sworn declarations prepared and delivered to various galleries, calling out fakes in their inventories. So this was a great effort for him, even to be involved with the help of Gabe Vadas and others. It was not easy, but Norval seemed determined to do it.
When you create something, it becomes like a child, and you can recognize that. It doesn't matter how many you've created or how long it's been since you created it.
Gabe Vadas again.
He knew exactly where he was when those pieces were created. And so he was able to identify hundreds of works that were not of his hand.
But by 2005, Norval had had enough. The sworn declarations weren't making an impact. So Norval calls together a group of art historians and scholars and curators, heavy hitters in the art world, to form a team to defend his name, his art, his legacy, to fight the fakes.
And the idea of the Norval Morriseau Heritage Society was to create a non-biased society that could form a committee that could create a chronology or database of actual works, which we'd call the catalogue raisonné.
A catalogue raisonné is a published text, a catalogue of an artist's complete works. It's a way to outline the provenance of anything an artist ever created. When it comes to authenticating artwork, the catalogue raisonné is often a starting point for any investigation. Most famous artists have them. Da Vinci, Picasso, Rothko. They can take decades to complete. They're usually made by a committee, like the one Norval created.
Of course, it was a big task at hand, but we did form the committee. And of course, Norval was at the first meeting of that committee. And we invited some wonderful people to get involved. And it seemed very positive.
Norval set this up with the understanding that a group of scholars and curators who knew and understood him and his work would be able to create a catalogue raisonné. And a catalogue raisonné for any artist is really the gold standard.
This is Carmen Robertson. She was a member of the Norval Morrisseau Heritage Society, the NMHS. She's an art historian, and her work focuses on Norval.
But very quickly, it became clear that there were more and more fakes and less chance that that catalogue raisonné could be created. There were far more questionable works out there than could be accounted for, and therefore it was difficult and basically impossible to create a catalogue raisonné because of that.
And then things started to get, well, weird.
There was bullying, there was threats against members of the NMHS.
All the people, I think without exception, all the people who say there are no fakes are people who are deeply financially invested in questioned Norval Morrisseau paintings. They're people who have bought a lot of these paintings, and they've invested money, and they stand to gain or lose a lot depending on the outcome of this stuff.
These people started websites to say there are no fakes, and they criticized the work of the NMHS.
There were some very weird things on these websites. For example, there was a doctored photographs that showed Nazi children burning books, and they said the NMHS members are like the Nazi youth, burning original Morrisseaus. I mean, it was so bizarre and hurtful to see that online. Things got very heated, and then when I decided to serve as the expert witness in the Hearn case, then that created all sorts of new heat on me, which I wish had never happened.
Kevin Hearn was continuing Norval's fight against the fakes. But there are a lot of people that didn't want this to happen.
They were spreading misinformation about the art fraud and, blaming it on anyone who stood up to the fakes. They would show up at all the court hearings and disrupt things and hiss at me.
There was a lot that was going on around this court. It was incredibly stressful. I wasn't sleeping. I was barely eating.
It was just highly chaotic. Going into the trial, I frankly thought that we had an extremely strong case.
Well, it really did feel like the Twilight Zone because I just assumed that it was kind of a slam dunk.
That's on the next episode of Forged. Forged is a co-production of CBC in Canada and ABC in Australia. It was produced by Kyle Musica and showrunner Zoe Tennant. Our contributing reporter is Luke Rinaldi. Additional production support from Rudy Bremer and Anna Marie Harding. Our contributing editor is Phelan Johnson, and our senior producer and story editor is Veronica Simmons. Sound design and original music by Graham MacDonald. Emily Metu is our fact-checker. Roshni Nair is our coordinating producer. At CBC Podcasts, executive producers are Cecil Fernandez and Chris Oak. Tanya Springer is the senior manager, and Arif Noorani is director. Special thanks to the CBC Indigenous office. At ABC, Calric Martin and Jessica Radburn are executive producers.